Dust swirling around the corral usually meant a broken bone, or worse whenever Goliath was loose. Yet standing completely still, the massive black mustang let a stranger run a stiff brush down his lethal flank. Jaden froze, realizing this frail, shivering woman had just achieved the absolute impossible. High in the unforgiving, jagged peaks of the San Juan Mountains, winter did not merely arrive. It assaulted the landscape. Jaden Rawlins knew the signs of the coming freeze better than any man alive. A former cavalry scout who had traded the blood-soaked plains of the Indian Wars for the isolated tranquility of the Colorado Rockies, Jaden preferred the company of towering pines and biting winds to the treacherous nature of human beings. His only companion was a beast as solitary and dangerous as himself, a massive coal-black mustang named Goliath. Goliath was a creature born of fire and wild storms. Jaden had pulled him from a treacherous mudslide canyon 3 years prior, nursing the half-starved stallion back to health. In return, Goliath offered unwavering loyalty to Jaden and pure, unadulterated malice to the rest of the world. Just 2 summers ago, down in Durango, a heavy-handed blacksmith had tried to shoe the mustang. Goliath had shattered the man's collarbone and 3 ribs with a single lightning-fast kick. Since that day, no one but Jaden was permitted within 10 paces of the horse. The animal trusted no one, an instinct Jaden respected and shared. Returning from a grueling 3-day trek, checking his snare lines along the high ridges, Jaden expected nothing but the cold, empty silence of his homestead. His heavy snowshoes crunched rhythmically against the powder, his breath pluming like smoke from a locomotive engine. His cabin, built of sturdy, hand-hewn lodgepole pines, sat tucked beneath a protective overhang of granite. Beside it was the reinforced corral. As Jaden crested the final ridge, his sharp eyes caught an anomaly. The heavy wooden gate of the corral was unlatched, swaying slightly in the biting wind. His hand instinctively dropped to the grip of the Colt revolver strapped to his thigh. Mountain lions, desperate for a winter meal, were common, but they didn't unlatch gates. Rustlers rarely made it up this high, but desperation drove men to foolish acts. Silently, Jaden closed the distance, slipping from tree to tree. He rounded the corner of the barn, his heart hammering a slow, steady rhythm against his ribs. What he saw stopped him dead in his tracks, stripping the breath from his lungs faster than the high-altitude air. A woman stood inside the enclosure. She was a slight thing, swallowed by a tattered men's wool coat that hung past her knees. Her boots were worn down to the soles, wrapped in rags and twine to keep out the snow. Her dark hair was a tangled mess, escaping from beneath a frayed woolen cap, her face pale and pinched from the severe cold. But it wasn't her sudden, miraculous presence in the middle of nowhere that paralyzed the mountain man. It was what she was doing. She stood directly beside Goliath. She held one of Jaden's stiff-bristled grooming brushes in her trembling, raw, ungloved hand. Slowly, rhythmically, she was dragging the brush down the stallion's powerful, muscular shoulder. Jaden waited for the explosion of violence. He braced himself for the horrific crack of hooves against fragile bone. But the violence never came. Instead, the murderous black mustang had his head lowered, his ears relaxed and pitched forward. Goliath let out a low, rumbling sigh, leaning his massive weight ever so slightly into the woman's gentle strokes. The horse, who possessed an uncanny ability to sense fear, deceit, and malice, was completely docile. Jaden watched, mesmerized. For a man who relied entirely on the instincts of the wild to survive, this was a profound revelation. If Goliath trusted her, there was something fundamentally different, something exceptionally pure about this desperate stranger. If you pull his tail, he might just decide to take your arm off. Jaden's deep, gravelly voice broke the mountain silence. The The woman gasped, dropping the brush into the snow. She spun around, her large, terrified hazel eyes locking onto Jaden. She scrambled backward, hitting the heavy wooden rails of the corral, her chest heaving in panic. Goliath snorted, suddenly alert, shifting his body defensively between the woman and Jaden. Jaden raised both his hands, keeping them far from his weapon, his movements slow and deliberate. "Easy now, miss. I ain't going to hurt you, but I suggest you step slowly out of that enclosure before he realizes you aren't me." She hesitated, her eyes darting between the towering, bearded mountain man in his thick, bare hide coat and the open gate. Slowly shivering violently as the adrenaline faded, she slipped out of the corral. As soon as she was clear, Jaden latched the heavy gate. "You're a long way from nowhere," Jaden said, his sharp blue eyes studying her battered state. She looked half-starved, her lips carrying a dangerous bluish tint. "How did you make it up the Devil's Pass alive?" I kept walking." She stammered, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form the words. She clutched a heavy leather satchel tightly against her chest, as if it contained her very soul. "They told me down in the valley. They told me no one comes up here. They said whoever lived on the ridge was a madman." Jaden let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "They're not entirely wrong, but a madman's fire is warmer than freezing to death in a snowbank. Come inside." She hesitated, her grip tightening on her satchel. Trust did not come easily to her either. Jaden could read the defensive posture, the wild, hunted look in her eyes. It was the look of a trapped animal. "Miss," Jaden said softly, the harshness dropping from his voice. "My horse doesn't let anyone touch him. He let you. That means you ain't looking to cause harm. Now you can freeze out here, or you can come inside and drink some coffee. The choice is yours." With a slow, reluctant nod, she followed him toward the cabin. As she stepped across the threshold, into the welcoming warmth of the hearth, her legs finally gave out. Jaden caught her before she hit the floorboards. She was dangerously light. "Janine," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut as exhaustion finally claimed her. "My name is Janine Rivera." What? For 3 days and 3 nights, a brutal blizzard hammered the San Juan Mountains, effectively cutting Jaden's homestead off from the rest of the world. Walls of white snow buried the lower windows of the cabin, and the wind screamed like a wounded banshee through the pines. Inside, the fire roared continuously. Jaden proved to be a quiet but attentive host. He brewed bitter willow bark tea to bring down Janine's fever and fed her rich, salted venison stew to rebuild her strength. He gave her his bed, sleeping on a pile of wolf pelts near the hearth. During those days they spoke little, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was a sanctuary of recovery. By the 4th morning, the storm broke, leaving behind a pristine, blindingly white world. Janine was sitting by the fire, a heavy wool blanket draped over her shoulders. Her color had returned, and the hollows of her cheeks were less pronounced. She watched Jaden as he carefully cleaned his Winchester rifle at the sturdy oak table. "You never asked me why I was running," Janine said, quietly, breaking the morning silence. Jaden didn't look up from his work, carefully oiling the lever action. "Out here, a person's past belongs to them. Mountains don't care who you were down below. They only care if you can survive today." "I need to tell you," she insisted, her voice gaining strength. She reached for the leather satchel she had guarded so fiercely since her arrival. Her trembling hands undid the heavy brass buckles, pulling out a thick stack of legal documents tied with a red ribbon. "My father was Elias Rivera. He built the largest cattle operation in the lower valley." Janine stared into the flames, her eyes reflecting ghosts. He was a good man, but he was trusting. Too trusting. Jaden stopped his cleaning, placing the rag down. He knew the name, Rivera. It commanded respect in the territory. "He died last spring," Jaden recalled aloud. "Fever, the town doctor said." "Arsenic." Janine corrected, her voice turning hard and bitter. "It was arsenic in his whiskey, and the man who poured it was Arthur Pendleton." Jaden's jaw tightened. Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a man. He was an institution of greed. A wealthy, ruthless railroad magnate and cattle baron from Wyoming, Pendleton had been systematically absorbing ranches across Colorado, using whatever means necessary: bribery, extortion, and now, apparently, murder. "My father left everything to me in his will." Janine continued, tears shimmering in her eyes but refusing to fall. "The land, the water, rights, the cattle." Pendleton had already bought off the local sheriff and the circuit judge. They froze the estate. Pendleton came to me with a simple proposition: marry him, merge the estates legally, or face an accident before I could ever claim my inheritance. "So you ran," Jaden murmured, understanding dawning on him. "I stole the original deeds and the ledger detailing his bribes." She tapped the papers in her lap. "Without these, he can't legally claim the Rivera spread, and if I can get these to the federal marshal in Denver, Pendleton will hang. But his men caught me at the train station. I barely escaped into the foothills. I just kept climbing higher and higher, hoping the cold would stop them. I was going to die on this mountain, Mr. Rawlins. I had accepted it. And then I found your horse." Jaden looked at the woman sitting by his fire. Beneath the fragile, battered exterior lay a spine of pure steel. She had taken on one of the most powerful men in the territory, armed with nothing but a satchel of paper and sheer desperation. Goliath's instincts had been dead on. She was extraordinary. "Jed," he said softly. "Call me Jed." "Jed." She smiled faintly, the expression transforming her face, softening the trauma etched into her features. "Thank you for not throwing me back out there." "I couldn't even if I wanted to," Jaden replied, a rare, genuine smile touching his bearded face. "Goliath would probably kick my teeth in if I evicted his favorite groomer." The quiet intimacy of the moment was shattered by a sound outside. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the crunch of settling snow. It was a rhythmic, desperate thrashing coming from the edge of the tree line, followed by the agitated snorting of Goliath in the corral. Jaden's demeanor instantly shifted. The gentle host vanished, replaced by the hardened cavalry scout. He snatched his Winchester from the table, jacking around into the chamber with a loud metallic clack. "Stay away from the windows," he ordered, his voice barely a whisper. He slipped out the back door, moving through the deep snow with silent, predatory grace. He circled wide around the corral, keeping the wind in his face to muffle his approach. As he neared the eastern ridge, he saw the source of the disturbance. A man was half buried in a snowdrift, desperately trying to drag himself forward. He was dressed in expensive fur-lined trail gear, but he was clearly freezing to death. His horse was nowhere to be seen, likely lost to a hidden ravine during the blizzard. Jaden raised his rifle, stepping out from behind a massive pine. "Hold it right there," he barked. The man froze, then slowly raised a frostbitten hand. "Help!" he croaked, his lips cracked and bleeding. "Please! Lost in the storm." Jaden closed the distance, keeping the rifle leveled at the man's chest. As he drew closer, he noticed the heavy leather duster the man wore, and more importantly, the silver badge pinned to the vest underneath. But it wasn't a lawman's badge. It was a private security insignia, the unmistakable crest of the Pendleton Cattle Company. This wasn't a lost traveler. This was a tracker. Pendleton's men hadn't given up. They had followed her trail into the high peaks before the storm hit. Jaden stood over the shivering, dying man. The law of the mountains dictated that you helped a man freezing to death, but the law of survival dictated that you eliminated a threat. If he let this man live, the tracker would report back to Pendleton. If he let him die, he became no better than the murderers Janine was running from. "Looking for something, friend?" Jaden asked, his voice colder than the ice beneath his boots. The tracker peered up through snow-encrusted eyelashes, delirious. "Bounty. $50,000. Girl. Stolen papers." The man coughed violently, spitting dark blood onto the pristine white snow. Pendleton, his whole crew, camped at the base of the pass, waiting for the thaw. Jaden's blood ran cold. One tracker was manageable, but an entire crew of heavily armed mercenaries waiting at the bottom of the mountain meant that Janine was effectively trapped. The moment the snow cleared enough for horses to travel, an army would ascend the mountain to slaughter them both. He grabbed the dying tracker by the collar, dragging him out of the snowbank. He would save the man's life not out of mercy, but because he needed answers. The real fight hadn't even begun, and Jaden Rawlins realized that for the first time in years, he had something truly worth fighting for. Dragging the half-dead tracker through the knee-deep drifts required every ounce of Jaden's formidable strength. He bypassed the warm cabin, hauling the shivering mercenary into the drafty, hay-scented confines of the barn. Tying the man to a sturdy support post, Jaden sparked a lantern and tossed a coarse horse blanket over his freezing shoulders. "Wake up!" Jaden growled, slapping the man's icy cheek. Caleb Montgomery, a name Jaden found stitched into the inside of the man's leather duster, coughed violently, his eyes fluttering open. The delirium of hypothermia was fading, replaced by the stark, terrifying realization of his captivity. He stared at the giant mountain man, and then at the massive black mustang snorting aggressively from the adjacent stall. "Arthur Pendleton sent you," Jaden stated, leaning against the wooden stall. "It wasn't a question. You said there's a crew at the base of the pass. I want numbers, names, and their exact location." Montgomery spat a wad of crimson onto the hay-strewn floor. "You're a dead man hillbilly. Pendleton didn't just send cowhands. He hired Josiah Galt. Deacon Galt and 15 heavily armed regulators are camped at Miller's Crossing, just waiting for the trails to clear. They know the girl is up here. They found her discarded snowshoes 2 miles down." Jaden's stoic expression betrayed nothing but his stomach tightened. Deacon Galt was a notorious Pinkerton reject, a man who had been discharged for excessive cruelty during the railroad strikes in Wyoming. If Galt was leading the posse, there would be no negotiations, no prisoners. Janine stood in the barn doorway, a heavy rifle clutched clumsily in her hands. She had followed him out, her face pale, as she recognized the captive. "That's Montgomery," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "He was the one who dragged my father's body out of the study." Montgomery offered a gruesome, blood-stained grin. "Hello, Miss Rivera. Your daddy squealed like a stuck pig when that poison hit his belly." Before Jaden could react, Janine crossed the barn in 3 swift strides. She didn't scream, and she didn't cry. She simply swung the heavy walnut stock of the Winchester, cracking it squarely across Montgomery's jaw. The tracker's head snapped back, and he slumped unconscious against the ropes. Jaden stared at her, deeply impressed. The frightened, shivering girl he had pulled from the snow was gone, replaced by a fiercely determined woman forged in the fires of betrayal. "Can you shoot that thing?" Jaden asked, nodding at the rifle. Janine adjusted her grip on the weapon. "My father taught me how to drop a coyote at 200 yards. I've never shot a man, Jed. But I will not let them take me back, and I will not let them kill you because of my mess." "Then we have work to do," Jaden said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "The thaw is coming fast. By tomorrow noon, the pass will be clear enough for horses. Galt and his men will be coming up the ridge. We are outnumbered 8-1. If we try to run through the deep snow now, we'll freeze, or they'll pick us off from the high ground. So we fight, she asked, stepping closer to him. We fight, Jaden confirmed, but we fight on my terms. For the next 24 hours, the homestead transformed into a fortress. Jaden knew the terrain intimately, every hidden ravine, every unstable snowpack, and every blind corner. He spent the afternoon setting tripwires, strung with dynamite across the main approach, trails burying sharpened stakes beneath thin layers of snow, and barricading the cabin's lower windows with heavy oak planks. Inside the cabin that evening, the tension hung thick in the air, a potent mix of impending violence and an undeniable growing closeness between the two of them. Janine sat by the hearth, loading brass cartridges into spare magazines, her hands steady. Jaden watched her from the table as he cleaned his revolvers. "When this is over," he said quietly, "you take those papers to U.S. Marshal Thomas Holden in Denver. He's one of the few honest men left with a badge. He knew your father. He'll see Pendleton hangs." Janine stopped her work, looking up at him. "You say that like you won't be coming with me." "My place is here, Janine. I belong to these mountains." She stood up, walking slowly across the wooden floorboards until she was standing directly in front of him. She reached out her soft, warm hand, resting over his rough, scarred knuckles. "You told me mountains don't care who you were down below. But I care who you are right now, Jed. You risked your life for a stranger. You gave me hope when I had none." Jaden stood towering over her, yet feeling entirely disarmed. He had fought Comanche warriors, grizzly bears, and merciless outlaws, but looking into Janine's fierce hazel eyes, he felt a profound vulnerability he hadn't experienced in a decade. He gently cupped her face, his thumb tracing the soft curve of her cheek. "I won't let them take you," he whispered fiercely. She leaned up, pressing her lips against his. The kiss was desperate tasting of wood smoke fear and a sudden burning promise of a future neither had dared to imagine. Outside, the wind howled, masking the distant ominous sound of horses churning through the melting snow. The thaw had arrived, and with it, the devil's posse. Dawn broke with a deceptive, glittering beauty across the San Juan peaks. The brilliant sunshine reflected off the melting snow, creating a blinding glare. Jaden lay prone on the reinforced roof of the cabin, his Sharps buffalo rifle pressed firmly against his shoulder. Through his spyglass he spotted them. 15 riders moving in a loose tactical formation up the eastern ridge. At the front rode Josiah Deacon Galt, wearing a long black coat and a bowler hat, a smoking cigar clamped between his teeth. "Wait for it," Jaden muttered to himself. Galt signaled his men to halt near a narrow choke point between two massive granite boulders. The bounty hunter raised his voice, the sound carrying easily in the thin mountain air. "Rawlins, we know you're up there. Send the girl down with the papers and I'll leave you your scalp." Jaden didn't answer with words. He adjusted his elevation, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The heavy .50 caliber slug roared from the barrel, tearing through the frigid air and striking the snowpack directly above the boulders. The impact triggered the first trap. The unstable shelf of ice and snow gave way, cascading down in a violent, localized avalanche. 3 of Galt's men were swept screaming off the edge of the ridge, their horses tumbling into the ravine below. Gunfire immediately erupted. Bullets splintered the wooden logs of the cabin and shattered the upper windows. Jaden rolled behind the stone chimney, returning fire with lethal precision. Every time his rifle cracked, a mercenary fell from the saddle. Inside the cabin, Janine manned the lower gun ports. She fired rhythmically, keeping the flanking riders pinned down. Her aim was true, her father's lessons guiding her trembling hands. But Galt was a seasoned killer. Realizing a frontal assault was suicide, he ordered his remaining men to fan out into the tree line, using the thick pines for cover. They began to advance slowly, laying down a suppressing fire that chewed the cabin's exterior to splinters. "Jed!" Janine screamed from below. They're circling behind the barn. Jaden scrambled down the interior ladder. The air inside the cabin was thick with acrid gun smoke. A sudden terrifying crash echoed from the rear of the homestead. A bundle of dynamite had been tossed against the back wall. The explosion blew the heavy oak door inward, setting the corner of the roof ablaze. Flames quickly hungrily licked at the dry timber. "We can't hold it," Jaden yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire and crackling fire. "Grab the satchel, we have to move." Janine slung the leather bag over her shoulder. Jaden grabbed her hand, leading her out through a hidden root cellar tunnel that exited behind the corral. The smoke from the burning cabin provided a thick grey screen, momentarily blinding Galt's men. They emerged near the corral. Goliath was frantic, rearing and kicking at the heavy wooden rails as the smell of smoke filled his nostrils. Jaden sprinted to the gate, throwing it open. He didn't have time to saddle the beast. "Get on!" Jaden yelled, vaulting onto the Mustang's bare, muscular back. Janine hesitated for a fraction of a second, staring at the notoriously violent horse. But Goliath didn't rear. The stallion recognized the woman who had brushed him, sensing her panic. He lowered his massive shoulder. Jaden reached down, grabbed Janine's arm and hauled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms tightly around his waist, burying her face against his back. "Hold on," Jaden roared. He dug his heels into Goliath's flanks. The black Mustang exploded forward like a cannonball, charging straight through the smoke screen and directly toward the tree line where Galt's men were hiding. "Shoot the horse!" Galt bellowed, raising his own repeater. Bullets zipped past them like angry hornets. One grazed Jaden's thigh, but he didn't even flinch. Goliath, a creature of pure, unadulterated power, plowed through the deep snowdrifts with terrifying speed. A mercenary stepped out from behind a pine, raising his shotgun. Goliath didn't veer away. The Mustang lunged forward, slamming his massive chest into the man, sending him flying into the brush with a sickening crunch. They burst through the tree line, galloping onto the perilous narrow ridge trail that led down the back of the mountain. The sheer drop to their right was hundreds of feet down into a rocky gorge. Galt and his remaining men mounted their own horses, desperate to pursue, but the melting snow on the narrow path made the chase treacherous. Goliath, however, was born in these jagged peaks. His iron-hard hooves found purchase where normal horses slipped. He navigated the treacherous descent with instinctual brilliance, carrying Jaden and Janine further and further away from the burning homestead. By nightfall they had reached the lower valleys, leaving Galt and his surviving mercenaries stranded in the freezing mud of the upper pass. The pursuit was broken. 3 days later, a weary, battered pair walked through the ornate double doors of the Federal Marshal's office in Denver. U.S. Marshal Thomas Holden, a grizzled lawman with a thick gray mustache, looked up from his desk in shock as Janine Rivera dropped the heavy leather satchel onto his desk. "Pendleton murdered my father," Janine said, her voice echoing with unwavering authority. "The proof is in that bag. Bribes, land theft, and the poison he purchased. And a man named Josiah Galt led an attack on us to silence me." Holden opened the satchel, his eyes scanning the documents. A grim smile spread across his face. "I've been trying to nail Arthur Pendleton to the wall for 5 years, Miss Rivera. You just handed me the hammer." Within the week, federal marshals raided Pendleton's lavish estate. The cattle baron was arrested, screaming empty threats as he was dragged away in irons. Galt was apprehended trying to cross the border into Wyoming, ultimately swinging from a gallows in Cheyenne. The Rivera estate was unfrozen, and Janine's rightful inheritance was restored. She stood on the grand porch of her newly reclaimed ranch house, looking out over the sprawling green valley. She wore a fine silk dress, her hair pinned up elegantly. She possessed everything she had fought for, everything her father had built. Yet her eyes constantly drifted toward the towering, snow-capped peaks of the San Juan Mountains in the distance. A heavy set of footsteps sounded on the porch stairs. Janine turned. Jaden stood there looking wildly out of place in the civilized valley. He had traded his bear-hide coat for a clean cotton shirt and canvas trousers, but he still looked like a wild thing, barely contained. At the hitching post, Goliath was tied, eyeing the stable boys with murderous intent. "You look well, Janine," Jaden said softly, nervously twisting his hat in his massive hands. "I came to say goodbye. The mountains are calling me back." Janine walked slowly down the stairs, stopping just inches from him. "You told me once that you belonged to the mountains, Jed." "I do. And I told you that I care who you are right now." She smiled, reaching out to take his hat from his hands. She tossed it onto a nearby chair. "The valley is too quiet, Jaden Rawlins, and I hear there's a burned-down cabin up on Devil's Pass that needs rebuilding." Jaden stared at her, his rugged face breaking into a wide, joyous smile. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her under the wide Colorado sky. He had spent his life hiding from the world, trusting no one but a dangerous horse. But Janine Rivera had walked into his corral, brushed away his defenses, and claimed his heart. And as Goliath let out a loud, approving snort from the hitching post, Jaden knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. If you loved this Wild West story of survival, betrayal, and untamed romance, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this tale with your friends who love historical drama, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories from the frontier. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Goliath the Mustang, and ring the bell so you never miss an upload.